Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the 11th studio album from acclaimed mega superstar Taylor Swift, The Tortured Poets Department. Boy, has this album caused a lot of feverish typing on the interweb. And I think that what I want to do with this review is remain as fair and balanced as I can be. I want to preface this video by saying that I am not a registered, trademarked Swiftie. However, I am a fan of probably over 50% of Taylor Swift's catalog. I do love when I love a Taylor Swift song, I really do love it. And I do really respect Taylor's songwriting ability. And I do think that she's got just an amazing body of work and an amazing work ethic. So, whatever potential negatives that may come out of this review, I want to preface by saying that. And I also want to just preface for those who are worried, this is not going to be a trash talking review. This is not going to be like some of those reviews I'm seeing popping up where perhaps, and this is coming from someone who's not a Swiftie, perhaps people are not being as objective. Perhaps subjectivity is always in art, but I feel like some people are not giving this album a fair chance. And there's a discourse amongst Swifties that they feel like the general public is starting to turn on Taylor. I think that some of that is general paranoia. I think a lot of Swifties are sort of looking for any and all criticism of Taylor and like reblogging it on Twitter so that everyone can see it and get outraged. And somewhat kind of proving the point that some people have, which is that they're worried Swifties are becoming a bit like a cult with Taylor. There's definitely an argument to make that I feel like a lot of Taylor Swift fans are like incapable of admitting that Taylor could potentially make any mistakes or not make a great song. What's probably the most disturbing is the kind of takes I'm seeing from some Swifties saying that Taylor Swift winning Grammy Album of the Years consistently all the time is because from some objective standpoint, Taylor's music is just always the best that's ever put out every year that the Grammys could possibly award. And when Folklore came out, I think you could make an argument for that. When 1989 came out, I could see your argument. Certainly could see your argument with Fearless. I would have argued for Red, Justice for Red's Album of the Year. But with that being said, that is not the case for Midnights, and that is not the case for Tortured Poets. It's a worthy album of being nominated, but it is not the only deserving Album of the Year awarded album. And I'm seeing a lot of Swifties kind of veer into that territory, and it just shows that they don't really respect any other artists. It's like you have to give it to Taylor. If you don't, then it's going to be this huge scandal and Taylor's going to be rightfully upset. And Beyonce is behind the reasons that Taylor's getting some disparaging reviews in the press. And it's all Beyonce's fault. And it's just turning into this Beyonce's fans versus Taylor's fans thing that's getting really ugly. And I don't like to see it. And so I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but I do feel like it's getting out of hand in all angles. There's just not a lot of level-headed people when it comes to Taylor Swift. And that's what I'm trying to be here. Yes, I do think that Taylor is bordering on overexposed. I do think that Taylor should take some more time off between her releases. I do think that she is starting to, get a little too comfortable working with the same people, and that's starting to impact the appeal of her sound. But I also think that these are, critiques that are nuanced, and I also don't think they're as severe as some people are pointing it out to be. I really didn't like seeing some of the hypocrisy in articles like in the New York Times, for example. They're talking about Taylor being overexposed, but if you were to look at a lot of these publications, including the New York Times, they're largely responsible for the wall-to-wall coverage that we've seen of Taylor, particularly in the last year. So it's your fault. I mean, Taylor didn't necessarily ask for all of that coverage. When it comes to the NFL stuff, the NFL was the one choosing to spotlight her, and I don't think Taylor really wanted that. so I feel for her to a certain extent in that, it's not necessarily all her doing. I don't think she's trying to mass manipulate the media to that degree. But I do think that there is, a narrative that is trying to be kind of preserved and co opted that is sort of underneath a lot of this. And it's addressed pretty openly in some of these songs, which we've seen before. But I was very taken aback by how directly I felt Taylor was talking to the public and the fans. It's not something we've seen at least since Reputation. And so I have mixed feelings about where Taylor is coming from with some of this stuff, which I'll get into when I dive into the songs I want to talk about. Because there are 31 songs here, which, believe me, I was just as shocked as anyone else. And yet at the same time, should we really be shocked? I mean, Taylor is known for just dropping casually 15, 16 song albums like it's hotcakes at any given moment. So was it really all that surprising that, after Midnights and we got the 3 a.m. edition, which had 5 extra songs just out of the blue that she never hinted at or gave? Was it really that surprising that after I had sat down and listened to all 16 songs and thought, okay, I've just listened to Taylor's 11th studio album. I know there's a couple bonus tracks that are on the vinyls exclusively. They'll probably come to streaming at some point. But by and large, I've listened to most of the record, if not all of it. And then I go online and I'm seeing people talk about 31 songs, and I'm like, what the heck? And I find out she dropped another 15, which includes those 4 bonus songs that were on their own vinyl variants, plus 11 other songs. And I'm just like, at that point, it's like 3 a.m, and I'm just like, heaven help us. Heaven help us. I gotta be honest with you, I really rolled my eyes. I was like, Taylor, this is too goddamn much. This is too much. I mean, Beyonce put out a 27 song album, but like 4 or 5 of those songs were like a minute or less. None of these songs are short. The shortest song is like 2.5 minutes. Some of these songs are 5 to 6 minutes long. Listening to this entire project felt like an eternity. I'm going to be real. It took me so long to listen to every song because I had felt very much like after listening to the original 16, I was full, I was appetized, I didn't need anything more. And then it was just, I'm not going to lie, I needed time. And I think a lot of Swifties agree. They needed to go to bed and they needed to listen to it the second half, which is called the Anthology, or the whole thing is called the Anthology. I'm a little confused. Is it a side A and side B situation? Is it TS11 and TS12? I think it is all TS11. I do believe that this is just one long album where we are getting the vault tracks, the deluxe tracks right away instead of waiting like we have in recent years with lots of artists. But it is such a large album that there's pluses and negatives to that being the fact. The plus side is that there are more songs that I'm potentially going to have more favorites. But if there are also more songs, there may also potentially be more songs I don't like. And it's such a slog to go through them, to find them, if you're not a Swiftie. If you're a Swiftie, this is like heaven on earth. But if you're not a Swiftie and you just casually, well, semi-casually, if not, a little more judiciously, want to really study what she's putting out, to critique it, to absorb it, and see which songs you want to keep on your phone, it's just a lot. It's just a lot. And now I feel like I have the core songs that I really, and they're the songs I really want to talk about. Out of the 31, there are 18 songs that I kept on my phone, that I kept downloaded. That's how I'm feeling at this moment. A couple other songs, they could grow on me. That's happened in the past. False God grew on me. Mastermind has somewhat grown on me a little bit. That can happen. But usually I feel pretty strongly after a couple listens which Taylor Swift songs are worth the cut and which ones, are not for me. And 18 out of 31 is a bigger number than what Midnights was offering when it comes to skips versus non-skips. So that's why I ultimately feel like this album is stronger than Midnights, but it's more just because there's more songs, and the more songs there are, the better chance there will be more songs I'll like. I feel like Midnights, at the end of the day, was actually a relatively short album by Taylor Swift's modern standards, we had 13 songs on the standard, then we had 5 bonus songs, and then we had 2 more after that. So it ended up being roughly 20 songs, which, is still a pretty big project. But, 20 compared to 31, that makes a difference in how many songs stand out for me. It was not 18 out of 20 songs on Midnights, I'll tell you that. It was more like maybe 11 songs out of that number for me. Midnights had a lot of skips, and if you've seen my review, which I will link in the description, you will know what I'm talking about. It's why I'm really kind of a little still super flabbergasted that Taylor won Album of the Year for Midnights at the Grammys. I filmed a video about the Grammys this past February. You might want to check that out if you're interested. If you're a Swiftie, you might not want to. But, I try to be fair. I still believe that Taylor, even though it's not really her fault, Taylor winning Album of the Year for Midnights was not good timing. And I don't think, again, she expected it. But to announce this album, to know we've got one coming so right off the heels in the next award eligibility window means that once again, Taylor is going to be competing for Album of the Year. She has competed for Album of the Year at the Grammys, I believe, 4 out of the last 5 years that the Grammys are now going to be taking place if we count this coming year. The only year that she didn't compete was in 2023, because she only released Red, Taylor's version, in that eligibility window. Folklore, and then Evermore, Midnights, Tortured Poets. Not all of those can win Album of the Year. We can't be giving the same person Album of the Year year after year. It's not, you could say it's not fair, but I think it just shows that, if you're looking at what the Grammys is supposed to look at, a wide variety of musicians, right? There's no way that one artist is producing the best every single year. It's just not how it works, unless you're being completely subjective. Which I guess, yeah, that's what Grammy and awards bodies are, but I feel like they could try a little harder. Evermore, of course, did not win Album of the Year, but I don't think we were that surprised. I think we all felt that Evermore was a weaker version of Folklore, even though I know there are a ton of Evermore stands out there. I still regard Evermore as a weaker version of Folklore, but that's not to say that Evermore is a bad Taylor Swift album. I think Evermore and Folklore are one of her better albums, some of her better albums. I just think Folklore ultimately has more songs that I don't want to skip, whereas Evermore has a few too many. And, that's just how the cookie crumbles. And perhaps I feel kind of the way I felt about Evermore with the Tortured Poets department. I respect the album so much for the artistic merit and the emotional catharsis that was imbued in the project. This is Taylor. A lot of people have said that they feel Taylor made this album for the fans and the fans only, that it wasn't so much for the critics, that it was for the longtime fans who have been with her through this journey, who will understand a little bit more of how she's singing, what she's singing about, that this is not necessarily even an album that is conducive to a world tour. One of the biggest alarm bells or question marks that went up in my head, I'm sure it did for many others, is why the heck did she release an album in the middle of the Eras tour? There's no more room. I actually watched the Eras tour on Disney Plus a few weeks ago for the first time. I'd never watched the Eras tour yet. And I really did enjoy it. I really did enjoy it, but goodness gracious, is that a long show. And, there's no room to add any more songs. You can only make a show so long before it just starts to become too much. And for Tortured Poets, I just don't see where it fits. I think that what we'll get is new surprise songs. There'll be some Tortured Poets songs thrown in there as surprise songs, and that'll be what it is. And perhaps Taylor wanted to release this album during a period where she wouldn't necessarily be called on to tour it so exclusively, because this is such a deeply personal and somewhat raw and traumatizing period of her life that she's recounting to us. Maybe it doesn't necessarily fit the, stadium kind of arena vibe. Some songs certainly could, but I definitely see her maybe plucking a few songs for future tours, but I don't see this album getting its own tour or even a serious section on the Eras tour. I feel that it just is too unfair to all the people who bought tickets last year to change the show up so drastically besides surprise songs. And I just think that that's already too long of a show. I mean, I guess there are songs I would cut from the Eras tour. There are certainly songs that I would have cut out most of Midnight's. I think I would have just had Antihero and Karma, and that's it. Maybe Mastermind. But yeah, Midnight's closing out the album, the Eras tour is kind of let's just say for someone who doesn't like Midnight's and it's my least favorite Taylor Swift album. I'm sorry, I have to say it is my least favorite Taylor Swift album. I think it is her worst album. It's a lot of Jack Antonoff's fault, but I do think also It Takes Two to Tango. There are just so many songs that fall flat for me in so many ways. I just think the album is very weak. You know, remember, I'm a sonics first, lyrics second person with music. I do value lyrics, but you know, sometimes I'm like, Taylor, this could have been a poetry book. And that's definitely what I think a lot of people are thinking with Torture Poets. You know, the music video has her typing all these things on the typewriter. And it's like, I'd love to see a poetry book. I'd love to see a poetry book by Taylor. I think she'd really excel in that lane. She's obviously trying to market herself as the 21st century Emily Dickinson, the 21st century Jane Austen. And there's a niche there. But do extremely verbose poems always need to be, you know, wrapped up in song? I would say most of the time, but you know, when you have 31 here, poetry books can be quite long. I do feel like some trimming, you know, some holding back is important because I just feel like when you put everything out, you do sort of oversaturate your sound and you leave the viewer or the listener feeling exhausted when they should be in some ways wanting more at the end of a project rather than feeling like I cannot listen to a single another Taylor Swift song for a little while. At least that's how I feel as a non-Swiftie. It was like this weekend, I felt like I was just listening to Taylor Swift nonstop, trying to get through all of these songs and listen to them multiple times to give them their fair shake. And it's just like so much. It's like over almost 2 hours of music, Taylor Swift music. It's a lot. Plus, you know, the Eras tour. It's like, whew. So what I'm going to do with this video is I'm not going to talk about every song because I would be here for eons. I'm sorry, this isn't going to be a super deep dive analysis into everything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my favorite songs. I'm also going to talk about perhaps some songs that are my least favorite, but I'm not going to, you know, I've decided I don't really want to dwell. There's so much negativity around, you know, reviewing music and this album in particular right now that I'm not sure I really want to focus on the songs I don't like. Because the truth is that most of the songs I don't like are mostly just because of Jack Antonoff's production, and I don't like the melody. It doesn't exist to me. It's very flat. It's the same problem that I have with Midnight's. So there's not much more to say beyond that. Now, there are questionable lyrics, and I think we all know some of those lyrics. They've been plastered all over Twitter as of late. But some of those lyrics actually fall on songs I really like. They're the one blip in an otherwise, I think, very well-written song. So I'll touch on those if they come up. But I wouldn't necessarily fault this album so much for its writing, because I don't really think that's a weak spot of Taylor. I think the weak spot of Taylor for her is having an ear for a melody to house so many of these, you know, poems that she's writing. However, I was actually pretty impressed because I was very nervous after hearing the 1989 Vault tracks, which were exclusively produced by Jack Antonoff. He only had 2 songs on the original album, but for some reason she decided to give him the entire Vault. That was a real mistake. I was really nervous that this album, and particularly all the songs that were produced by Jack, were going to have all the sonic issues that I felt the 1989 Vault did. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that's not really the case. Most of the Jack Antonoff songs actually lift off the ground. And I'm actually really impressed with some of the production on some of his tracks. I'm like, you know what? For once, it's not all the Antonoff songs that I'm saying, cross out, don't like. There's actually a lot of Dessner songs I don't like. But I was always like hit or miss with Dessner. I think he's a great collaborator for Taylor. And Dessner has a lot. Actually, Dessner, I think Taylor was very smart in exactly splitting it down the middle. Dessner and Antonoff each get 16 songs. Now, some of those songs they're not full producers on, they're partial producers, and they share with, of course, Taylor Swift, who's a producer, credited as a producer on all her songs, but also with the other. So some of them do share producing credits. Those songs are But Daddy, I Love Him and Thank You, Amy, whereas I Look in People's Windows has someone named Patrick Berger. Don't know where he popped up. I don't know who he is, but he shows up on just one song as a co-writer and co-producer there. All of the other songs are either Antonoff or Dessner, with the exception of Fortnight, which also has Louis Bell as a producer. It's probably because of Post Malone's verses, and he works a lot with Post Malone. So they each get a share of the record, and the second half is definitely more Dessner-centric than the first, which is an interesting way to play up this record. But I will say that the Antonoff side is not as bad as I would expect it to be after looking at the producer credits. There's a lot of catchy songs. There's a lot of well-produced songs on the first half. So what are my favorite songs in the first half of the record, tracks 1 through 16? I think my favorite is probably going to have to go to Florida. Now, it's partially just largely due to the fact that I am such a huge Florence and the Machine fan. When I saw that Florence Welch and Taylor were going to collaborate, I did get very excited. This song is explosive in the way I want it to be, that I feel Taylor's held back from doing oftentimes with her own music. Their pairing is just so magnetic and natural. I wasn't sure how it was going to come across. And I'm just so happy that Florence actually gets a full verse. She doesn't just get harmonizations and backing vocals. She gets a full verse, a long verse, and then she also gets call and response parts of the chorus with beautiful harmonizing backing vocals. So Florence is fully a part of this project, unlike, in situations like with Colby Kaye or with the Dixie Chicks. Even Lana Del Rey, to a certain extent, getting sidelined. That was just enough to make me so happy. Taylor's finally learning her lesson about her female collaborators. Give them equal space of the song if you're going to feature them. And she does the same for Post Malone. But I vastly prefer this collaboration. I love the urgency, the sort of manic catharsis, and idea of using Florida as this sort of metaphor for escaping your life, but being like in a safe space. I saw someone pull up The Truman Show, and I just saw that movie. And apparently that movie was filmed in a town in Florida. And even though the movie is meant to be, this town is a fictional made-up place in a Hollywood studio, you could look at Florida as being sort of like a mini utopia for some people to escape to let go of their problems. And the way this song kind of addresses that is sort of like treating Florida like a drug. We've seen Lana Del Rey and other artists, many artists, talk about this. And it doesn't really heal you, but it feels like it does. It's a placebo. It's a hollow comfort. It's a comfort, but it's very hollow. It doesn't have a lot of substance to it that's going to actually help you in the long run. So yeah, Florida, I was a little skeptical with the 3 exclamation points, but now I think it's brilliant. I think Florida is like, there's an exuberance to when you think about Florida. And you can really tell that Florence wrote her own lines because she has a pen that's, there are similarities with Swift, but different. You feel that Southern Gothic haunted energy coming up. And the wailing vocals of Florence match so perfectly with how Swift is on the song. I'm really happy with this one. Another one that I really love, which interestingly had Aaron Dessner as a writer, but also as a producer, and that is a Dessner song on the first half, is So Long London. The opening where she's just chorally reverberating that title, it's like filling up a cathedral with her vocals. It's so heavenly. I loved hearing that. So different from anything Taylor's ever done. And then, we do get that, pulsating bass line. And Taylor, like you can hear it in her voice, how broken she is mourning the relationship that we all saw fall apart last year. 6 years with Joe Alwyn. This is the only song that is explicitly about him, because we all know that he lived in London and he was the main reason she moved to London. I have seen some Swifties say that she's actually more so just mourning London itself and mourning her time in the UK rather than explicitly mourning Joe, because for some reason I think a lot of Swifties want to kind of negate the negative feedback that is coming through, which, I did side eye at the beginning, where Taylor admits to us and sort of uses Joe's depression as the reason she broke up with him. You sacrificed our love to the gods of your bluest days. I think that's a very clear nod to, and Joe Alwyn has spoken up about this. I think there was an interview a couple years ago with Paul Mescal where he opened up about mental health and depression. And so I could very much see the story, and of course we're inferring things, but that's what her songwriting is meant for us to do, right? That's what she writes. She didn't want us to make these inferences. She neither has to spell it out clear and plainly or, not write so obviously about her own life. I mean, I'm not saying it's always obvious, but it's usually like very clear that we may not know exactly what she's referring to, but we know that she's writing about something that's happened to her in her own personal life. You just have to put the pieces together. And that's what Swifties love to do, which is why I think it's really strange that she's then attacking her Swifties and the fans for doing that very thing when, she calls out people for not liking that she's with Maddie Healy and for saying, I should be able to write what I want and blah, blah, blah. We'll get to that when we talk about who's afraid of little old me. Perhaps Joe's depression was making her depressed. So Taylor, has pointed out in many songs that she's suffered from depression in the last few years. This isn't new to Tortured Poets. I think for some people it's sort of like, whoa, we had no idea it was this dark at some places. There's been glimmers of it in albums going back at least to Folklore. And yeah, perhaps I really do ultimately think Joe and Taylor were not a match. I think that Joe is just too introspective for her. And she's much better off with someone like Travis, who is more loving being in the spotlight, loving being in the party. And Joe is, like me, someone who's a little bit more of a quiet book reader type. That's how he appears to be. And so I think that maybe it just did kind of get her down. Not to mention, being in the UK, those rainy days, it gets really depressing. I've visited the UK many times, and every time I go, even in the summer, it's always in the summer that I go usually, I think, gosh, how much rain do these people see and how little sun do these people see so much of the year? I mean, in the north especially, it's a real problem. It'd be a real problem for me as someone who sort of needs the sun, and spring and summer to like not completely be in seasonal affective disorder all the time. So this is a really beautiful, melancholic, bittersweet tribute song to that era of her life. 2 graves, 1 gun. This chapter is over. I think a lot of people were shocked at how little this album was about Joe Alwyn, at least overtly, because that's what we all expected it to be. But I think that perhaps it's not so much that Taylor wanted to get back at Joe by being like, and you thought you were going to at least get to be the center of attention by me giving you an album all about you. No, I'm not even going to give you like more than like 1 song. This is all going to be about Matt Healy. I don't think it was like a bitter kind of snub mentality. I think, and this is just me inferring, I think Taylor respects Joe Alwyn more. I think Taylor kind of felt like their relationship was so long and so special and sacred to both of them. To tarnish that with the gossip-fueled lyricism that, is going to fuel more gossip and drama and speculation, I think she might have done it out of respect for him. I think she respects him a lot more than Matt Healy. I hope she does. Maybe this is just me being hopeful. Because a lot of these songs are about the 1975 frontman. Apparently, they've been together on and off for possibly a decade. Certain songs start to bring that to light. People are piecing things together, doing their sleuthing. I don't have time for that. Good for y'all. But the songs that are very clearly about him, but Daddy, I Love Him is perhaps the most glaring. What I have such a problem, before I get into that, let me just say the songs I really do like off of the first half. I really do like My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys. I love the melody line. I think this song is more of a lead single than Fortnight. I just feel like it has more of a strong melody. It has that signature synth sound of Jack Antonoff, but it's inoffensive to me here. I don't mind it. Fortnight, on the other hand, which is the lead single, which does have a music video, is too sleepy. It's too understated. It's perhaps the most mellow Taylor Swift single she's ever put out. especially as a lead single. I question why it was chosen other than the fact that it had Post Malone. They sound nice together, and I do have been growing on Post Malone's vocals, but this song is serviceable at best. It doesn't necessarily leap off the page as like a highlight song. Maybe it's a good intro to the record, but it's too understated. It's too minimal for what it should be as like a pop number. And this album is a pop album, especially the first half. I've seen some people be like, well, people don't like it because it's not pop. I'm like, especially the Antonoff tracks, this is still pop music. I don't know what kind of definition you give pop, but this is very much pop music. With the exception of, like I said, some of the Dessner tracks. Some of the Dessner tracks veer into folktronica, different kind of almost country tinged roots that she explores on, and some rock, soft rock. Um, the Tortured Poets Department is even a stronger song for me than Fortnight. Can I say that this is what I expected the 1989 Vault to sound like? If we had to have Jack Antonoff, I was expecting songs like Tortured Poets and My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys. These sound like they could have easily fit on 1989. I hear the similarities in production to songs like I Wish You Would and You Are in Love. I hear that even more strongly. And these songs would have fit right at home. I mean, I think lyrically, they're a little more explorative than what she was doing on 1989. That's not to say that 1989 has weak songwriting. I just think that these are very much poems first, songs second, whereas 1989 was more songs first, poems second. That's sort of how I get that vibe from that record, at least the big singles. But I mean, it does have that line about Charlie Puth. Come on, Charlie Puth is a big artist. I just need to say this. All right, Charlie Puth, the reason why he's not that big is because he doesn't put out that much music. He's only put out 3 albums in 10 years. If he put out more music, he would have been huge. I mean, See You Again, that song was everywhere in 2015. And then let's not forget Attention. That song was like it was huge on the charts in like 2017. So I don't, yeah, Charlie Puth had his moment, and he's only kind of sabotaged himself by not putting out that much music. So I don't know if she was being a little facetious with that lyric, but there are so many other better artists to place there. I Can Fix Him. No, really, I can. That song's really interesting because of its like dark kind of country western sound. And even I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. This is definitely the Bejeweled sister of the record, where it has that like glittery kind of production that Jack likes to use, which is very different. I don't know a lot of artists who kind of use that sort of staccato, glittery production keyboard work. But it's juvenile, but it also works with this song way better than I think it did with Bejeweled. This song is a playful, kind of juvenile sonic sound to match the manic sort of state of mind that she's in. I think a lot of us who are functioning depressives can relate to the fact that, we are really depressed, but we wear a smile to try and hide that, and we get what we need to do done. Try and come for my job, she says at the end. But I'm miserable. I mean, I had a big smile on my face because I felt like the way this song sort of unravels in the key changes and the sort of manicness of it, you really feel what she's singing and the energy and the state of mind that she's in at the end. You know that you've got it if you can do it with a broken heart is a really great, mantra to keep in the back of your mind, to sort of pat yourself on the back for all the, BS that you've had to deal with, but also like being like, I've actually been really productive considering what I've gone through. That's really impressive, and I deserve so many awards and medals for that. But the songs of his that don't work for me are Down Bad. It's probably one of my least favorite songs on the record. But Daddy, I Love Him has Antonoff on it, but it's more of a Dessner sound. And I do think it's interesting because it sounds very much like Fearless Taylor is coming out a little bit. I love how she has a little bit more of that precocious energy coming through. That is it's very evocative of Fearless in the way her voice sounds. She's not so much in her lower register the whole time. And then also The Alchemy. I think The Alchemy is a real miss for me sonically. A lot of people are picking up that this song is one of 2 songs that are about her new beau, Travis Kelce. This one is definitely the more lyrically interesting one, But I find the other Travis Kelce songs, So High School, to be way more sonically alluring, even though the lyrics, I mean, a lot of people are like wondering, is Travis Kelce really the best muse for her? Are we really just going to get more touch me while your boys play Grand Theft Auto kind of lines from him? You know how to ball, I know Aristotle. It perfectly sums up their relationship. I'm sorry, but Travis Kelce seems like a nice guy, but there's nothing going on up there. That's how it is for most NFL football players. We love a himbo. Himbos can be really, steadfast partners. They can be really stand up guys. But I don't know if he's necessarily going to be pushing Taylor intellectually. That's where I do sometimes wonder, Taylor has almost exclusively dated men who are, in the acting profession, in the music industry, artists, people who have a little more of a culture to them. They're a little more cultured in the humanities. So for Taylor to go for a football player, I do sometimes wonder. On the one hand, it seems perfect because I've always given that. I think I talk about this in my 1989 review. She always seemed like the type to be with a football player. Even though she says in 15, you'll do greater things. I always saw her coming back to that kind of wags lifestyle. It's just like a stereotypical role that she seems to, from first glance appear to fit in very well. But I think Taylor needs someone who is a little more intellectually stimulating long term. And that's my biggest concern about Travis and Taylor, honestly, long term. I mean, I don't believe that they are a pure PR relationship, but I worry that there's so much in lust, there's so much in the honeymoon stage, and the fact that there was all this chasing the high of his Super Bowl and her atmospheric success with the Eras Tour, that once that all sort of settles down a little bit, and he's no longer perhaps, he doesn't get nearly as far in the next upcoming football season. They have a lot more time together when she's off of the tour, and they're sitting at home together, one realizing that they're not on the same wavelength most of the time. I do worry about that sometimes. Taylor is a very intelligent woman, and intelligent women can get with men who aren't that intelligent. It happens all the time. As long as they're loving and they're not misogynistic, I guess it works, and there's love there. But I do feel like he's not the best muse. There's not that much interesting stuff to sing about with him, I suppose. But I also do hope she has a stable relationship for a change, because it sounds like she's really been through the grinder the last year. Well, and also her whole life to a degree with love. Yeah, so some of these songs don't, like Fresh Out the Slammer is another one. Sonically, it's just not really working for me. Yeah, I do feel like Antonoff impressed me. The songs he works on that I like, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. They're serviceable. But then again, I liked Antihero when he worked on that one. So he's not incapable of making a hit. I mean, he made Cruel Summer. He made Getaway Car. But he does have a distinct sound. It's very different from all the other people she's worked with. You can clearly tell. And I do think it's time for her to see other people. Maybe have a few Antonoff moments, but he can't be doing 50% more of the album anymore. It's got to be someone else. I would also argue maybe Dessner too. I think she's kind of done what she can with them. But I feel like Dessner is better at not having a distinct sound. I don't feel like I automatically can tell it's a Dessner song, whereas with Antonoff, I really can, particularly with Taylor, but with other artists as well. So on Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, by the way, this is one of the few self-written songs on the record. I do just want to address some problems that I do have with this one. First of all, I think that it's a really wonderfully constructed melody. It's a longer song. Maybe it could have been trimmed down a little bit, but I do like how she sort of lets her vocal erupt a bit. I wasn't expecting it. We don't get like so much in the last few albums, shouty, belting Taylor. It's very like, chest voice sort of narrative style. And so for her to kind of raise that octave up when she sings Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, I'm like, wow, okay. I really feel like we're putting on a performance here. I love that dynamism. So sonically, I don't really have too much of a problem with it. But lyrically, I do feel like Taylor sticking, and this is also a problem with But Daddy, I Love Him. Taylor calling out the fans to say that, it's not right for you to judge me based on what my man has done. And she says that in I Can Fix Him. No, really, I can. His jokes were, really bad and too loud, and paraphrasing. Um, she's obviously referring to the podcast clips that came up around the time that Matt and Taylor were dating. All of the problematic things that he said and liked and sort of laughed at. I mean, he comes across as just, he may not actually be a racist. He may not actually be a racist. He may not necessarily be all of the things we think he is by what some are saying, but I feel like Matt Healy is insensitive. I feel like he doesn't care about offending sometimes for certain people. I feel like that's a trait with a lot of these hipster types. They think that they're so edgy because their sense of humor is maybe not super PC all the time, and they lambast cancel culture. I get those vibes from him. I don't know the man, never listened to an interview. I've listened to a few 1975 songs. They're not really for me. But I do feel like, and in But Daddy, I Love Him, she's sort of, you know, she's saying like, I'm gonna have his baby, haha, psych, but you should see your faces. It's belittling what we were genuinely concerned about. It's like completely sweeping under the rug the very justified concerns that many in the fandom had over his comments and his behavior. And for her Taylor to cast herself once again as the victim, she does like to do that. She does like to do that. And, say it's my business, not yours, and butt out of it. Who are you to tell me who I can and can't be with? It's almost like it's in But Daddy, I Love Him. There's an aura of the more you resist, the more I want him. It's like that kind of toxic relationship. I don't find that endearing, and I suppose that's the point of this record. Taylor is just putting out like somewhat messy, emotional sort of garbage on display and wrapping it up in beautiful poetry, but admitting things that aren't so flattering about how she felt at that time. And Taylor perhaps is maybe taking ownership of it later on in the record, because like The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, I think really does put a beautiful pin on like, wait a minute. No, 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 no. You're nothing. The way you treated me, the things you've said, those two things together, I'm out. But I do find it to be, I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way. I do feel like at a certain point, Taylor is just constantly pushing against this foe that she's fighting against. Maybe it's the patriarchy, and the patriarchy is real, but I do think when it comes to Taylor, she's got blind spots there in where there are certain aspects of it and the intersectionalism of race and gender and class and sexuality that she's a little naive to. And I do feel like she kind of, yeah, it's what some people complain Taylor Swift of doing, which is like performative feminism, which is that, if it affects me, I'll stand up for it. If it goes against my own interests, I won't say anything, or at worst, I'll push back against it, and I'll write in a song about how annoying it was for you all to keep bringing this stuff up and for shaming me. I am above shame. I am above making mistakes. It's like, girl, we all make mistakes, I feel for you that you didn't really realize how problematic this guy was, and you had to scramble, and you'd already developed feelings, I guess. I don't know what feelings you could develop for someone like Matt Healy. I mean, look, I'm biased because I know all the controversy, but he is not attractive. He is not attractive, okay? We've all watched Flushed Away. He looks identical to that character. What did Taylor see in this guy? I have no idea. But it's not my life. It's not, it's taste is taste, okay? It's different from person to person. It can't be explained rationally. But on Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, again, it's the same kind of, the world is against me, and just you watch, I will rise up and be a phoenix. I just feel like it's so, it's hitting you over the head in a way that at this point, you do kind of, at the same time, you see Taylor getting all of this insane amount of success, pulling in the highest grossing tour of like all the modern era. pulling in during the strikes like an obscene amount of box office that wasn't even going through a middleman studio. It was all going to her and the theaters. You see all of the sale records that she has and the committed fan base, and you just start to think like, girl, can you just sit and eat your food? Can you just sit and eat your food? Don't call out the fans. Don't call out the media anymore. The media is going to talk. The media is going to say things, and sometimes you do need to address it, but you're just fueling the fire by constantly like railing up against. If it was an internal struggle or like something that was not so, I think, expressly towards the audience that's listening, I feel like it would be fine. But I just feel like Taylor's in a space now where I don't really think she should be, lecturing the audience on her anymore. I just feel like it's tone deaf because Taylor is like one of the luckiest people in the world. She's one of the richest people in the world, in the music space, and she has so much positive stuff to sing about in some ways that I know that negatives always ring louder, but it bothers me to a little bit of an extent. I just really don't. This narrative of like, I'm just this, demure, helpless woman who can't help but be successful at everything I do. And whenever I get attacks, it just makes me stronger. I mean, of course, good for you. You get stronger every time you make a mistake, every time, someone comes for you. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's always a necessary kind of factor of life. But I do just feel like putting in a 6-minute song like this, it just feels like you're just beating over the head with something that I just feel like is very tone deaf. I feel like, this is where I feel like some of the publications this is where they're getting at when they feel like Taylor is overwriting her music, or she's overthinking things. And she's making this rift, potentially grow more than it ever really actually was. She's turning nothing into something, not nothing, but something not quite as big as she's pointing it out to be, into something completely. It's like it's a little paranoid. It's a little paranoid. I get elements of that in this song. I don't know. If you point it out to a lover, totally valid. That lovers will do this to others all the time, and you have to fight back. And then there are some points in here, like you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me. That is a metaphor. We are not talking about where she literally grew up. We're talking about the music industry, okay? That is a mental asylum. Oh my God, such a mental asylum. All female musicians in particular have gone through it, going through that system. So, I definitely feel that some of what she's expressing is just frustration. The situation with Scooter and her masters, some of probably the misogyny that she faced in the early years of her career when she wasn't who she is today and she could do anything she wanted. That is very much like, yes, like rail against that system. Rail against the music industry because they're still really messed up. But the fans and the general public, I don't know, girl. I don't think that's when you're, getting borderline overexposed, whether you want to or not, I don't think that's the right line to take. But I've talked too long about this song. I think a nice sort of dovetail to that is Clara Bow. And I do think that Clara Bow is a really clever and interesting song for Taylor. I love the way that she takes a old Hollywood star from the silent era, then 50 years later talks about Stevie Nicks, an icon of the 70s. And then she, at the end, references herself. And so there's this like 50-year cycle of what she's showing is that women who are lauded in Hollywood and in the music industry are often used as the benchmark for success for up-and-coming women. But at a certain point, they're replaced, or there's a way in which their image is tried so desperately to be tarnished. And at some point, and this is already happening to Taylor, people are, telling little girls, you're just like Taylor Swift. In fact, you're even better than her. You're the better version of Taylor Swift. And that's what they said to probably Taylor when, she was, you're the better version of Stevie Nicks. And it's like, and it's this judging females against each other kind of thing that she's commenting on. The crown is stained, but you're the real queen. There's the crown as it's passed from woman to woman, there's bloodshed. Each has to be sacrificed at the altar of Hollywood before the next can be crowned. I mean, Marilyn Monroe is a perfect archetype of this. Princess Diana. We've seen lots of pop stars talk about this before, and it's a cycle that's important to comment on. And again, this is where I think Taylor is smartly railing against the system, railing against, the misogynistic cycle of fame. I don't think she's talking about Olivia Rodrigo, but some people are saying she is at the end. You can infer whatever you want to infer, but I like that song. I think it's also sonically really interesting. I love the guitar and the bass in the background. Love of My Life / Loss of My Life. We're getting more into the Desner tracks. I'm going to go through these a little quicker because there are a bunch of them that bleed into one song. And honestly, I feel like the whole second half of the record sounds like one long song with So High School plopped in the middle of it, which sounds very different from everything else on the record. But Love of My Life is a taste of what you get on the second half, which also stands for Loss of My Life. I think this is the other song that is very clearly about Joe, whereas all of the other songs could be about him, but I think are more about Matt Healy. That's how it feels to me, or even possibly other things or Travis Kelce. But I do love the funereal piano. It's so plaintive and ruminative, so forlorn as she laments this, what was meant to be the enduring relationship we all hoped it would be for her. And it's something I think about all the time. I'm so scared of if I ever have a massive breakup with someone I've spent a long time with. All of the could have, should have beens. And how could you throw this all away? How did we let this die? And you really, I think this is such a heart-wrenching exposition of that. So some of the brightest moments are some of the darkest. And especially when it comes to Joe, I think that she really just felt pure sadness. And I don't think perhaps there are a couple other songs. I think the Albatross is about Joe. Apparently, the albatross is a type of bird that can fly in the air for a long time. I read somewhere, is it 6 years? Albatrosses can go for years without touching land as they fly. They have giant wings. And I think that could have some sort of allegorical tie-in to her relationship with Joe. The Albatross is one of the standout songs for me. On How Did It End, the other song that I think she's talking about Joe, she is ruminating on the death of the relationship, examining it like a post-mortem. We hereby conduct this post-mortem. He was a hothouse flower to my outdoorsman. Our maladies were such we could not cure them, and so a touch that was my birthright became foreign. Come one, come all, it's happening again. The empathetic hunger descends. We'll tell no one except all of our friends. We must know, how did it end? In the bridge, say it once again with feeling, how the death rattle breathing, silenced as the soul was leaving, the deflation of our dreaming, leaving me bereft and reeling, my beloved ghost in me, sitting in a tree, D-Y-I-N-G, a reference to K-I-S-S-I-N-G. Come one, come all, everyone come and see the tragedy of a fallen relationship. But are we going to actually check in on the people who actually suffered? Again, I've seen I do feel like, I think it's starting to die down a little bit, but I do feel for Joe Alwyn. I feel like he's been amongst a firestorm, and to this day, we don't really know if he did anything actually wrong. And I just think that Swifties are jaded and bitter because, I don't know, Taylor was really in love with him, and he wasn't in the right headspace to go there all the way. I think it was more that they just weren't the right fit for each other, especially as Taylor's life became post-pandemic much more busy and arena filled. I think Joe was perfect for her in those lockdown years. We were blind to unforeseen circumstances. We learned the right steps to different dances and fell victim to interlopers' glances. Lost the game of chance. What are the chances? Soon they'll go home to their husbands, smug because they know they can trust him, then feverishly calling their cousins. On I Hate It Here, which is another standout for me, I think she's alluding to The Secret Garden, which is a book from the early 1900s. Wonderful 1993 movie, by the way. Singing about needing to escape, into a place of solace and solitude from everyday life. And I read about it in a book when I was a precocious child. Yeah, it's probably The Secret Garden. People need a key to get into. Cassandra. As a Florence and the Machine fan, I must admit I cringed when I saw Cassandra as a track title, because we all know that Taylor owns that Greek goddess right now because of because of Dance Fever. I do wish that, sometimes, especially if you're having that artist featured on your record, there was a little bit of respect. Like, you just had a song called Cassandra come out recently, so I'm not going to use that right now. But it's been a couple of years. What are you going to do? It's still one of the best songs on this record. The Greek goddess, prophetess, cursed by ex-lover Apollo, Cassandra, delivering a prophecy that no one will ever believe. Blood's thick, but nothing like a payroll, but they never spared a prayer for my soul. You can mark my words that I said it first. In a morning warning, no one heard. No one heard, not a single word. I think this is a much more insightful, kind of metaphoric, beautiful way of describing maybe what she's talking about in Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. It's just not so aggressively beating you over the head with, woe is me, by instead, making you think about this allegory of a prophetess who so many, I think, women can feel attuned to, predicting something that no one ever believes, and until it's too late. And they're sort of like, you could have stopped this. And there's a lot of different ways you can interpret that into Taylor's own life, and the sort of ways things may have fallen apart in her love life or in her public image. Peter is another allegorical song about growing up, first loves, Peter Pan. I've heard great things, Peter, but life was always easier on you. You said you were going to grow up. You said you were going to come find me. Words from the mouths of babes, promises oceans deep. Wendy constantly waiting at the window for Peter Pan to return. And maybe he never does. Or if he does, she's grown up, found someone else. He stayed the same. He waited too long. And that's something that Peter doesn't understand, because time doesn't work for him like it does for everyone else. I think that's such a bittersweet allegory for, I think, how Taylor might have felt with Joe. She waited for so long for Joe to go through what he was going through, that by the time it was possible that he would be ready to love, she was just like, look, I've been waiting at this window for so long. For so long. Do you realize how long it's been? I've given up all my youth for you. She references that in another song. That is really hard to hear. That echoes some insecurity that I have about a relationship gone south, that really sticks with me, of like the thought of, I gave you all my youth for free, and now I don't get anything back from it but heartache. It's like, that's love. That's how painful that game is. It's this investment that you may not ever get anything back from, but you do lose a lot of time. And so this is a really heart-wrenching song that has such a beautiful, bittersweet melody. It's light on its feet. It's just, these piano ballads are so at home for Taylor. And I hope she does a bunch of these as surprise songs, because they'll fit so well with the piano section on the tour. And this is Taylor at her strongest, I think, as a songwriter. It's no bells and whistles, just beautiful, gorgeous piano balladry with aching allegorical lyricism. And then also the other standout for me is Robin, singing about the revelry of childhood imagination and innocence. Long may you reign, you're an animal, you are bloodthirsty. I don't know if Robin is a child that she knows or is symbolizing. Could Robin be allusion to Christopher Robin? That was something that I was thinking. I haven't heard anyone pick that up yet. But I think that that might be, if she's going with the Peter Pan and then the Cassandra allegories, I think Robin might be an allusion to Christopher Robin from Winnie the Pooh. I mean, she sings "Way to Go, Tiger, Tigger, higher and higher, wilder and lighter for you." Oh, I just read here. Okay, the song's title, although never referenced in its lyrics, is likely a reference to the child of Swift's friend, collaborator, and musical soulmate Aaron Dessner, whose child is named Robin. Well, there you go. That answers that question for me. I just had to read down a little bit. But I love thinking about Christopher Robin with this song too, because the same still applies. Christopher Robin was the sort of epitome of childhood for all children and imagination at that stage of life. So those are the songs I really feel like touching on. The rest of the songs are fine. You know, the Bolter, it's fine. There's great lyricism on display, but they weren't the songs that I felt gravitated towards melodically. Obviously, So High School is the one song that really doesn't fit the rest of this pack here, with all the sort of more plaintive, lamentative piano ballads. But I do love the alt rock fusion sound that she's going for. It's so refreshing, like a crisp spring day of sun. But some people are like, it's a little cringe that she's singing about high school at 34 years old. And I'm like, well, that's what being in love with someone for the first time is like. And, y'all have to remember, Taylor didn't go to college. So, she's experiencing a lot of things that I think some people might have experienced earlier in their life, going through these stages where, these stars in the industry, their lives are very different from ours, the trajectories of it. Overall, the 18 songs that I really do like, I really do respect. And that does leave, about 12 songs or so that I think are fine. There's a couple that really aren't it for me. Jack Antonoff's production really ruins Fresh Out the Slammer, really ruins Down Bad for me, those two songs. Those are two examples of what I didn't like about Jack's production on 1989, where I think it's also the melody that Taylor's running with that's just letting the song down. I think there is a very kind of by the numbers melody line that she runs through with so many of her songs, and it just starts to sound the same. You've got the same kind of cadence, the same note family. Melodically, it's just, like I said, it's very stale. It just doesn't have a lot of range to it. And some of these songs melodically just fall flat for that reason. But yeah, overall, I like this album a lot more than Midnight's, and I expected I probably would. I feel like she wasn't trying to do commercial stuff here, and I always like when Taylor's kind of a little more a-commercial, for the most part. She has some great pop moments, but it's a lot to digest, and that's why this is a long video. But I wanted to make sure I was fair to it, because again, I do feel like, you've got some publications like Rolling Stone being way too, bending over backwards, giving it like 10s out of 10s and calling it the best album yet. And what was that one article that called her the better Adele? What the heck? I mean, Taylor should at least say something, because that is such a callous thing to say, to disparage another artist who's very much in the industry right now. And I'm sorry, it's just factually inaccurate. If we're talking about like pen and like lyricism, you could have that debate. But if we're talking about vocals and, singing ability and I'm sorry, but it's not a fair conversation. Adele blows Taylor out of the water vocally. And so for that publication to call her the better Adele, I guess they were alluding more towards like her, lyricism. But I mean, it's just because even Adele's lyrics aren't bad. Adele's lyrics are great. 21's lyricism, holy cow, like so brutally raw and honest and well written. I just don't understand what people are like, that's paid for by Taylor's team. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. That's a little shady to me. But then you also have publications who are calling it her worst album yet. they're saying it's overwritten, and that they're also talking about a ton of other things that aren't even about the music. They're talking about the NFL, and they're talking about news coverage and her Time magazine appearance. And, it's like those are all things that are a factor in the conversation if we're talking about public image. And this album does address public image. So that's relevant in those conversations. But overall, let's judge this body of work, independent of that. There's some really beautiful piano ballad poetry here. And that's kind of what Taylor is kind of bread and butter for now, I mean, I really do think she needs to work with new people. I've said that since Midnight's. I'm a broken record. I'm worried she won't. Because I feel like there's a part of it that Taylor, I don't know, she kind of thrives a little bit with that friction with some of her fans, or some of more like the casual fans who aren't Swifties but are on the edge. She likes to keep them on edge. She likes to sort of be like, oh, I'm not going to do what you want me to do because you can't tell me what to do. That's the reason. And it's like, okay, but constructive criticism, girl, constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is a thing. We're losing that in the polarization of the two sides that I'm seeing a lot of online. This is, people are just being really extreme with this record. And I can understand why. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and it is definitely not, as commercial sounding as Midnight's. But it's not as good as Folklore, but I think it's possibly better than Evermore. Possibly. I think the only reason why is because Evermore is a shorter project, and if it were longer, it would probably have the same number of songs I'd like on it. This project's so long, it's basically 2 albums in one. It has an unfair advantage. It's 31 songs. Of course, there's going to be more songs I like than an album that's shorter, usually, when it comes to Taylor's music these days. But we're still not at the heights of where I think Taylor can be musically. Red and Speak Now and Folklore and 1989 and even Fearless are still my top 5 favorite Taylor Swift albums. But this one might be coming in at number 6, upsetting Evermore, which I have at number 7. I tweeted this the other day because I was feeling it, and I was like, I think this is where my ranking stands. We'll see if it switches over time and how this album sticks with me over time. But that's how I feel about my top 7 albums of Taylor right now. What are your thoughts? Where would you rank this record? Do you agree, disagree? I'd love to hear, from all types of casuals to extreme fans of Taylor, what their thoughts are, because there's just so much to dissect here. I hope you all enjoyed this. My attempt at breaking it down could have been a longer video, but goodness, it's already long enough. Thank you all so much for watching. Please give this a like if you did enjoy. Subscribe for more content. All my Taylor Swift reviews will be linked in the description. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. Peace, love, and light. Bye.